Ever stop to wonder just how much control you really have over your day-to-day actions? You know, those decisions you feel good about and maybe the ones you later regret.
That's such a big question, isn't it? And it's right where we're heading today. We're doing a deep dive into this idea, partly inspired by the YouTube channel Georgia57, looking at what they call causal will versus free will.
Exactly. We've been digging into this really um, thought-provoking discussion. It makes you question if your choices are truly independent or, well, more like the next domino falling in a long chain.
Right. Does one thing just inevitably lead to the next? And if so, what does that mean for things we take for granted, like, morality, personal responsibility?
Yeah, those big concepts. So our mission today isn't to hand you all the answers because, frankly, who has them?
Definitely not us.
But we want to unpack the core arguments from this source material, make it clear, engaging, and sort of pull out the most insightful bits. See how it might shift the way you look at the world.
Okay, so let's dive in. A central point is this. If our will is causal meaning, our choices are basically the result of everything that came before. Our genes, our experiences, our environment.
All that stuff, yeah.
Then does the whole idea of personal morality, that gut feeling of right and wrong we judge ourselves and others by, does that actually hold up? It becomes questionable.
That's the core of it, isn't it? The discussion uses this really clear example. Imagine a boy raised somewhere where maybe taking things isn't seen as a big deal, it's just how things are done,
Okay.
versus a girl who's taught from day one stealing is absolutely wrong.
Right. Two totally different upbringings.
So the idea here with causal will is that their later actions, whether they take something or not, aren't really a spontaneous free choice in that moment. It's more like a direct result of that early conditioning, that
Yeah.
program.
And that really changes how you think about blame, doesn't it? Or even credit, for that matter.
Oh, fair.
Well, if someone does something we see as wrong, can we really hold them, just them, totally responsible, if their whole understanding of right and wrong was shaped by forces they didn't choose?
Like their family or the culture they grew up in.
Exactly. And flipping it, if someone does something amazing, something admirable, is it purely down to their individual free choice? Or is it also, product of the good influences, the opportunities they had?
It makes you realize how much of our own sense of right and wrong isn't maybe this universal thing we're all born with.
Yeah, it's often more a reflection of our specific culture, our family background, the ethics we were taught, implicitly or explicitly.
And the key point the source makes is you don't get to pick those settings, do you?
Not at all. You don't choose your parents, your birthplace, the basic beliefs swirling around you as you grow up.
So if those things are the main drivers shaping our moral compass, where does our independent, freely chosen moral responsibility really fit into the picture? It gets fuzzy.
And this has potentially huge implications for our relationships, right? On a
Mm,
personal level.
definitely. Think about it in your own life. When someone hurts you or lets you down,
The gut reaction is often anger, blame. You assume they chose to do that knowing it was wrong.
right. But this source we're looking at suggests that adopting this causal will perspective could actually shift that reaction.
How?
Towards what? Towards maybe understanding. Instead of just jumping straight to judgment,
Yeah.
maybe you pause and think, okay, what led them here? It could foster more compassion, maybe even forgiveness.
They use a really good analogy for this, actually. Think about a 2-year-old having a tantrum.
Okay, yeah, been there.
You get frustrated, sure, but you don't blame them in the same way you'd blame another adult, right?
No, you kind of get that they're overwhelmed, they don't have the tools yet, their understanding is limited.
Exactly. You recognize their agency, their self-control isn't fully developed. The argument here is, well, maybe we should extend a bit of that same understanding, that recognition of influencing factors to everyone,
Even ourselves.
even ourselves, acknowledging that our actions are also tangled up in this web of causes.
Now that raises a really practical question, and the discussion tackles it head on. If we accept this causal idea, does it mean we just let people harm us? If someone's compelled to do wrong?
Yeah, that's the big but, isn't it? And the source is clear.
Right.
No, that's not the implication.
Okay, good.
Even within a causal framework, taking action is still necessary. If someone's actions are causing harm, regardless of the deep causes, self-defense, intervention, holding people accountable in a practical sense, that's still part of the ongoing chain of cause and effect. It's a necessary response.
Right, your response becomes part of the causal chain too.
Precisely. Now, here's where it gets even more philosophical, perhaps. The discussion introduces this idea of almost like a universal feedback loop.
What do you mean?
It suggests that, generally speaking, actions that create happiness or well-being tend to get rewarded by the way things naturally work out, while actions that cause pain or suffering tend to lead to negative consequences or punishment.
So not like a person judging, but just
Yeah.
the natural flow of consequences.
Kind of, yeah. It's framed more as a consequence within the causal system itself, rather than some cosmic accountant tallying up moral points.
And this connects to another common worry. If we ditch the idea of free will, won't society just collapse into chaos if nobody's truly responsible?
That's a natural fear, for sure. But the argument presented is that our basic drives, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, those are still incredibly powerful motivators.
Regardless of our philosophy on free will.
Exactly. Those fundamental drives would likely keep things from descending into utter chaos. Actions that cause harm generally lead to bad feelings, social friction, negative outcomes for the person doing them too, eventually. That aversion to pain is a strong check.
It's interesting when you zoom out and look at our society, so much of it seems built on the opposite assumption.
Oh, absolutely. Think about our legal system. It's primarily based on punishing individuals for freely chosen criminal acts.
And our economic systems too, right?
Yeah.
Celebrating individual success, often framed as purely the result of personal effort and free choices.
Definitely. While the legal system does sometimes consider mitigating circumstances, acknowledging some causality, like a difficult upbringing,
Right, they nod to it.
the fundamental principle is still individual responsibility stemming from free will. And in economics, this belief in freely earned success can sometimes overshadow the role of, well, luck, circumstance, systemic factors.
The discussion even touches on how this intense focus on individual achievement, perhaps linked to a strong belief in free will, might even play a role in bigger issues, like climate change, where maybe individual or corporate gain is prioritized over collective well-being because the success feels entirely self-made and deserved.
It's a provocative connection to draw. It leads to this really deep question. If morality isn't primarily located in the individual's free choice, then where is it?
Where does it reside?
The source explores this idea that maybe morality or the impetus towards certain outcomes lies within the causal forces themselves, the causal past, the unfolding of reality, maybe even what some would call God or the universe.
Wow. That's a big concept. Does the causal past itself have free will then? Or is it also just unfolding?
Huh. Now you're hitting the really tough questions. The discussion acknowledges that this is where our understanding kind of hits a wall. Concepts like infinity, eternity, the ultimate first cause.
They're maybe beyond our full grasp.
Right. Whether that ultimate source is free or compelled is maybe unanswerable for us. But the crucial point for our experience, the source argues, is that we as individuals experience our will as being deeply shaped and, you could say, compelled by this chain of prior causes.
And that experience is what impacts our understanding of personal morality.
Exactly. Which ties into another really interesting thread. The idea of non-judgment.
Like the religious or spiritual concept.
Yeah, very similar. The argument is that if you truly accept the causal will perspective, then judging others harshly loses its logical foundation.
Because their actions weren't born out of a vacuum of pure free choice.
Precisely. If actions are determined by a complex web of factors stretching way back, then assigning absolute blame to the individual in the moment, it just doesn't quite fit.
So instead of judging, the focus shifts.
It shifts towards understanding, trying to figure out the why, what were the causal factors that led to this behavior. It's potentially a more productive and certainly more compassionate approach than simply assigning blame.
It's not about letting people off the hook for harmful actions, is it?
Not at all. It's about changing our internal response, moving from condemnation to curiosity, maybe. Understanding the roots of behavior doesn't mean excusing it, but it might change how we respond to it, both individually and maybe even systemically.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. This deep dive into the ideas from Georgia 57 really highlights some profound implications of seeing our wills as causal rather than purely free.
Yeah, it challenges some really fundamental assumptions we tend to hold about morality, about responsibility, how we interact with everyone around us.
And the takeaway for you, the listener, isn't necessarily to completely abandon the idea of free will overnight, but maybe to consider this causal perspective as a lens.
Right. It's a perspective that could potentially lead to, well, greater empathy, less judgment maybe, a more nuanced understanding of why people do the things they do, including yourself.
Again, not about excusing harm, but understanding its possible origins more deeply.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the surface action to the complex currents beneath.
So here's a final thought to maybe chew on. If we, as individuals and as a society, really started to operate from a place of understanding our wills as primarily causal, how might that change things?
Yeah, how would that shift our approach to, say, education or
Mhm.
justice or even just our day-to-day relationships?
What if acknowledging the limits of our individual control, paradoxically, is actually the first step towards building a more understanding and maybe even a more compassionate world?
That's definitely something worth thinking about. We encourage you to reflect on these ideas, maybe look more into the whole free will versus determinism debate. See if viewing everyday situations through this causal lens changes anything for you.